and welcome to Dispel Magic, the podcast where we overthink how the magic of D&D might shape your campaign in surprising and unexpected ways. I'm Benjamin, game designer and writer. You can find me on Twitter at sterlingvermin or the internet at large at sterlingvermin.com.
I knew you were going to say that. And my name is Dane. I'm a Dungeon Master, podcaster, and voice actor. And don't tell anyone, but I'm in danger everywhere online at Dane in Danger.
I knew you knew that I would say that, and I knew what you were going to say.
You know, it's interesting how thought works, because I feel like speech is instantaneous. So can you actually know it? I don't think I'm going to say this now, and then I say it, right? We're doing Detect Thoughts.
Yes, we're doing the spell Detect Thoughts, and Dane has a rapid-firing brain, and maybe he is one of those situations where he can just talk without there being surface thoughts, and so Detect Thoughts just doesn't.
It just happens. My brain produces. It's just a content creator constantly.
We're actually kind of going to get to, at the end, the possibility that certain practices might make you more resistant to this spell. I had not considered prior to this recording that ADHD might be one of them, but, you know, maybe it is.
That's what I'm here for. Well, let's run down the spell itself. Detect Thoughts is a second-level divination spell available to bards, sorcerers, and wizards. It takes one action to cast, has a range of 30 feet, technically self, and a duration of concentration up to 1 minute. The spell text says, for the duration, you can read the thoughts of certain creatures. When you cast the spell, and as your action on each turn until the spell ends, you can focus your mind on any one creature that you can see within 30 feet of you. If the creature you choose has an intelligence of 3 or lower, or doesn't speak any language, the creature is unaffected. You initially learn the surface thoughts of the creature, what is most on its mind in that moment. And as an action, you can either shift your attention to another creature's thoughts, or attempt to probe deeper into the same creature's mind. If you probe deeper, the target must make a wisdom saving throw. If it fails, you gain insight into its reasoning, if any, its emotional state, and something that looms large in its mind, such as something it worries over, loves, or hates. If it succeeds, the spell ends. Either way, the target knows that you are probing into its mind, and unless you shift your attention to another creature's thoughts, the creature can use its action on its turn to make an intelligence check contested by your intelligence check. If it succeeds, the spell ends. Questions verbally directed at the target creature naturally shape the course of its thoughts, so this spell is particularly effective as part of an interrogation. You can also use this spell to detect the presence of thinking creatures you can't see. When you cast the spell, or as your action during the duration, you can search for thoughts within 30 feet of you. The spell can penetrate barriers, but 2 feet of rock, 2 inches of any metal other than lead, or a thin sheet of lead blocks you. You can't detect a creature with an intelligence of 3 or lower, or one that doesn't speak any language. Once you detect the presence of a creature in this way, you can read its thoughts for the rest of the duration as described above, even if you can't see it. But it must still be within range.
Lots of clauses in this one.
It's got to be, they don't want you running rampant, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, but it's still, especially as you're reading that last one where it's like 4 different clauses in one sentence. Pretty funny.
The millennial habit of putting things in what are those called?
Parentheses?
No. The two half circles. What are those called?
Those are parentheses.
I thought these were parentheses. Oh well, I'll trust you to give context to what they're saying.
So the expected uses of this spell I guess are pretty much called out in the spell itself, which is unusual.
Yeah, they kind of spell it out for you.
Yeah, the primary purpose I think they imagine adventuring parties are going to use this for is interrogation. In the context of D&D, we're going to use the word a few times. In the context of D&D, it's easy to imagine that interrogation involves torture, but that's not what we mean when we're using the word interrogation today. any kind of like interview that's maybe performed under some duress would fall under the category.
Questioning for information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another kind of just aside is that one thing we didn't mention is that the material component for this is a copper piece. And so the joke of this spell is that it's literally a penny for your thoughts. A copper piece, a penny for your thoughts.
Clever. So clever.
Pretty good. Thanks, Wizards, for that. Dane, before I move on, I want to say that I'm seeing in your mind that you want to ask me about unexpected outcomes. Is that right?
Oh my God. Benjamin, you're right. That's amazing.
Well,
Benjamin, what are some unexpected outcomes that they didn't already tell us about?
So that they didn't already tell us, that I haven't told you about it yet?
Yeah. Well, so honestly, the invisible person was an unexpected thing. Because detect thoughts for me is you detect thoughts, right? Like all of the nitty gritty is just to pen you in. But when you see the spell detect thoughts, you're like, okay, I can detect their thoughts.
Yeah.
But the detect the thoughts of an invisible person, that was unexpected for me.
There's actually a few things there. You can detect the thoughts of invisible people. You can also detect the thoughts of like things that might be shape changed nearby you, like a druid that's hiding as a bird. Mm-hmm. Because now suddenly, no bird is going to have an intelligence of 4 or higher, and so your thing is going to go off pretty quickly when you realize that there's a sparrow with a 12 intelligence watching you.
Anything awakened? So if it's a mimic,
point.
If it's an awakened mimic, you'd be able to figure that out.
The way I think in which the spell would be most commonly encountered in a campaign setting is not in that in its utility as an interrogation device like the spell suggests, because it's so easy once you start using it that way to lose the spell, because they've got to make a saving throw, and if they make it, then the spell ends, and then every turn they can try to shut it off. So it's not a great use of the spell as just like if you want to be using it to shape the world. So when you start thinking about how the spell would shape the world, I think you pretty quickly would come to, well, like guards would use it a lot, right? They'd be, whenever you met with the king, somebody would be detecting thoughts before you got any kind of audience, just to make sure you weren't, running through your assassination plot in your head before that meeting.
Okay, first I sneak in. Okay, done that. Okay, next I have to position myself a little bit to the left. That's
Exactly.
how I imagine assassins sound.
That's definitely it.
Really nervous.
Yeah. Beyond meeting with kings, you can imagine, or just individual important people. This spell is also probably used by guards who are screening people coming into major events.
Coronations, christenings, things like that.
Big dances.
Big dances.
Yeah, big dances. All to ensure that, like, thieves, spies,
balls
assassins,
even. You
gossips,
could call them.
If you wanted to call them big balls, you could call a dance a big ball.
Multiple.
Moving along.
Well, and as we've touched on before, anything that the rich people want to do, the criminals want to do too. But hey, what's the difference at the end of the day? You know what I mean? Any kind of thieves guild would want to use this.
Right. So in a thieves guild, this is going to look more like you're not going to get to a crime boss or into a particularly high-ranking, like, heist meeting, maybe, without first getting scanned. There's actually even more utility with this spell for thieves, because you've got a few situations. One is that it's probably pretty fantastic for grifting. Like, if you're just walking around town scanning people's thoughts, just surface level thoughts, it'd be pretty easy to pick up on what kind of grift a person might be vulnerable to. Like, maybe sell a snake oil thing to this person who's thinking about their sick grandma or something.
Their grandma's sick, so you're going to sell them the cure.
Right, exactly.
That's rough.
That would be one use of it for criminals.
I also like just going around and saying, I know a secret. And then it's like saying, don't think about a crocodile, right? So just by saying, not even specific to anything, I know a secret. And then everyone's thinking like, ooh, the secrets. I don't know.
Yeah. So in addition to grifting, like just catching a person's random, what they're thinking about, and then using that as an idea for how to like manipulate them. Another way you can use the spell is to prompt them to think about something with a cryptic phrase. It could be blackmail. You could say something like, I know the secret you've been keeping from your husband, and just see what the first thing that person thinks about to see if you've got something there you can blackmail them with. The other one is if you walk up and wait, and I guess actually just do a knock on a door where there's like a secret society that meets. They ask for the password. Probably their surface thought is going to be the password.
100%.
Right? Because they're waiting for it. So there's lots of times where you might be able to prompt people to give you information by having it in their surface thoughts.
Yeah, and then, of course, the secrets that are gathered, you don't have to use them yourself if you want to pass them off the secondary underground market for such things. It seems like it would breed a lot of, what's the word, paranoia.
Yeah. Prince Richard walks around town thinking about feet all the time. Let's see what that's worth.
See what we can do with that.
Yeah, let's see how much he's willing to pay to get that not put in the papers.
What was the spell that we talked about? That it was scry, right?
Yes.
That would breed the tabloids. So, any shady tabloid is going to use scry and detect thoughts in tandem.
I think we're going to talk about this more later, maybe. But what this makes me think of is that it just means that like important people are just not going to be going around the city very much. They're going to be. I mean, I think they probably already don't. But they're going to be sending their minions out to do everything because they don't care if somebody reads their minions' thoughts, but they don't want their own personal thoughts read. And they're vulnerable to that with the spell.
As they're held up in their lead-lined castles.
Yes, yeah. Instead of ivory castles. Or ivory tower. There are a few other applications to this, too, that I think could become really common. Gamblers, for example, would love this spell. Winning poker would be super easy if you could just immediately tell whether or not your opponent was bluffing.
But that makes me think that to prevent that, any formal gambling places would just give out like lead caps to stop that from, like, it's a requirement, like a dress code. Wear your lead cap when you're going to Big Eddie's House of Games.
Yeah, it's bowling shoes and lead caps. That's the attire. That's right. I'm not 100% sure that that's how it works because it's not spelled out. So I don't know if I'm
going by X-Men rules.
Yes, yes, it does. It's very Professor X Magneto to have the helmet block it, but it's not clear to me that Detect Thoughts works like a beam from my brain to your brain and not just like kind of tendrils or through the aether, and it can kind of like just slip under your hat if you're wearing it. I think that idea is cool, so I might let it ride, but I don't know.
Well, thank you, counselor. Thank you, Judge Benjamin.
I'll
allow it.
You also might have this spell come up when artists are trying to get honest impressions of their work, when merchants are trying to sell their wares, which is kind of the flip side to the criminal grifting, is that you have merchants who are also using Detect Thoughts to, every time I go into a store and somebody comes over and says, can I help you? You're like, no, I'm just looking, but actually you are looking for one specific thing. You just don't want to get pulled into buying it if you look at it and you're not sure about it. Well, in this case, you skip that step because the merchant already knows what it is you came in to look for and will come right over and start trying to sell it to you.
Creepy. Also, focus groups would be a thing. What do you really think about it?
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting. There would be a lot of information, psychological information, that would be much easier to obtain in a world with Detect Thoughts than we currently have. But which also brings me to my next point, is that potentially there's a use for the spell in psychotherapy. I think the ethics of using it would be a bit perilous, but I can imagine specific circumstances where it could be useful. Somebody who's catatonic or who has difficulty expressing themselves might benefit from a therapist who can read their mind and kind of reflect back to them what's going on.
If we're talking ethics, the whole thing's pretty dubious. Using this in any capacity is very intrusive.
I think about ethics in that capacity only because that's what I do in the daylight hours, and there are a lot of ethics to the job.
Hey there, have you ever had a weird dream? Something embarrassing, stressful, or about Pete? A dream you'd rather people just not know about. Of course you have. Most people do. It's very common. Well, if you want to ensure no one is using Detect Thoughts and listening in on your weird urine river dreams, you need my patented lead-lined sleep box system, the Secure Sleep. A comfortable padded box that completely surrounds you with a thin sheet of lead to keep those dang dream peepers out. You know, the ones that peep your dreams? I invented the Secure Sleep system so that other folks can sleep soundly at night, knowing their dreams are secure. Personally, I have completely normal, boring dreams about, like, grocery stores and stuff. And definitely not about large groups of people cheering me on as I swim through a river of pee. I don't even think that's weird to dream about. The Secure Sleep system. Never suffer from shame insomnia again. Take it from me. Not only am I the owner, but I'm also not a customer. I had other people test it. But really, I don't even think dreaming about this stuff's that weird. It's not that weird. I dream normal.
As I mentioned earlier, probing is really only useful in its capacity as an interrogation technique. It's not kind of the broad use. It's not broadly how this spell is going to be useful in a setting. Part of the reason, if we break that down, is looking at what information you get if you start to dig down deeper. The first thing is, I have no idea what it means to say that you understand a creature's reasoning. Dane, I think you feel like you've got a sense of that, but I am still totally lost on what that means.
I feel like it's just purely for plot delivery. It's if they fail some persuasion checks or they fail whatever else, then somebody can detect thoughts and get not... This isn't how actual brains work and how actual thoughts work, but... They can use this to get the reasoning behind why they're doing something, so the party members can kind of have more of a foothold on what to do next, or to really understand the situation better. But people don't actually think, I did it for this reason, mwahaha, you know? Like, it's like supervillains monologuing. Like, that's completely for us, the viewer, rather than... anything motivated by real life examples. So the reasoning part is just so GMs can be like, hey, this is actually what's happening.
Yeah, it still doesn't really make any sense to me. It's like, because there's no context for it. It's not like you use Detect Thoughts when someone does something and then you find out why they did it. You're using Detect Thoughts, and you're just finding out why they do things generally, I guess?
I do think the spirit of it, and it's not specific, but I think the spirit is to find out why they do something. A specific thing.
I would like them to use the word motivation if that's what they're
No, that would be much more specific, yeah.
Anyway, so this spell also tells you there, if you dig in with the interrogation part, the emotional state, which, again, that's not a lot of help because most of the time you're going to be able to tell or infer the person's emotional state fairly easily. The last thing is the only thing that I think is truly useful, and it's something that it's that you learn something that looms large in the person's mind. And that is kind of, I think, where the info dump part of the spell comes, when the DM has been waiting to give you information and waiting for an excuse to give you information, and then you use Detect Thoughts on the right person, and then they tell you about this vast conspiracy that's unraveling.
Whatever is most weighing on their shoulders, and they can't stop thinking about it. And, of course, any really important person who has a great number of secrets or things they need to keep hidden would have to distance themselves even further. It seems like a pretty toxic workplace to me, but, you know, you'd have to sequester yourself. You'd have to limit your interactions with people that you trust the most.
Yeah, and there's going to be a lot of telling people why, like, to do something without telling them why you want them to do it, because you need them to not have that information.
Mission Impossible, yeah.
Exactly. That's
exactly what you were going for.
That's exactly what I was thinking of, is the movie franchise Mission Impossible. I haven't seen any of them, so that's purely based on like a kind of gut instinct about what Mission Impossible is about.
It's a universal human truth. Mission Impossible.
So another way in which the spell is limited is that it requires concentration. So you're not going to be casting any other concentration spells while you're casting this. It isn't a ritual, so it's always going to cost you a spell slot. It only lasts up to a minute, so not very long. Not even won't even get you through most of a social encounter. Which would probably be more like a few minutes. And then also it has all 3 spell component categories. So that's verbal, somatic, and material, which means that part of casting the spell is moving, part of casting the spell is saying specific words, and part of casting the spell is apparently waving around a penny.
And you can dupe people into thinking that you're casting the spell, right? Like even if you don't actually know it, you can be doing all of these elaborate things and make people think you can read their thoughts, and they'll be more on their guard.
Yeah, so that's one where you could turn what's normally a limitation of the spell, that it's difficult to discreetly cast, and make it into a positive where sometimes you're not casting it, you're just making the gestures, saying the words, and flailing your penny around, but you're not actually using the spell slot to cast it.
I love the idea of flailing a penny around. That's a mind picture right there. Can you see it now, Benjamin? Can you see it in your mind?
I can see it. Yeah.
Yeah,
it smells bad.
Smells like pennies.
Smells like pennies, and I do not like it.
Bad pennies.
So, given how ubiquitous the spell would be for its security, espionage, and other utilities, it would make sense that people would develop methods to avoid being a target of the spell. There are a couple clauses, thankfully, that make that work. One of which is having an intelligence of 3 or lower, but probably people are not going to willingly lower their intelligence to 3 or lower to avoid the spell. So that one is pretty much useless to us.
Is that enfeeblement? Is that
feeble?
Is that the
I
spell
think feeble mind.
A feeble mind.
Yeah.
Feeble mind. Right.
But the other exception to this rule, and I find this very weirdly phrased. The other exception to who can be targeted by this is creatures that don't speak a language. So
yeah,
the phrasing is weird. It's not creatures that can't speak a language, and it's not creatures that don't understand a language. It's creatures that don't speak a language.
Yeah.
So I
think this interpretation, is pretty. I would go ahead and say pedantic, but it is technically true, which is the best kind of true.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I seriously don't understand what the intention was. This is a weird way of phrasing this concept. So I'm not sure what they were trying to cut in or cut out here with that phrase. But one outcome of the clause,
I would say animals.
Well, but it doesn't say can't speak a language, and it doesn't say doesn't understand language. There's plenty of things in D&D that might not be capable of speech, but they do understand speech.
Well, that's fair. I'm just saying that I think the spirit of the poorly phrased caveat is you can't talk to animals. This isn't speak with animals. You can't read animals' brains.
Well, maybe, but they're professional game designers. Their whole thing is about using language to craft rules, so I'm not going to give them a pass that easy.
Fair enough.
Anyway, one outcome of the clause is that any creature that makes a vow of silence and so doesn't speak is apparently not able to be targeted because they've made a vow. I don't think it's enough that you make a vow. I think you actually have to probably not speak for some length of time before this doesn't read your mind.
You have to be a paladin of the Oath of Silence. You have to really, like with your very spirit, dedicate yourself to never speaking. So mimes.
Right.
Mime, you wouldn't be able to detect mime's thoughts. A lot of mime assassins out there.
I do like that outcome. So even if it's sort of a dumb idea, it's that's a great outcome. Mime assassins.
Mimes killing people. Yeah.
So if we don't like this, if we say it's kind of dumb that just people who don't speak are excluded, we only like the idea that creatures that can't speak a language are excluded, then we're left with, well, people could make changes to their biology, to their anatomy, to make it so that it is impossible for them to produce speech. And in that case, you've got people who could remove their own tongue, remove their voice box, in other ways kind of damage kind of their vocal system to make it so they cannot speak and thus are not capable of being targeted by the spell.
I should have started the whole podcast with the immortal words of No Doubt. Don't speak. I know just what you're thinking.
That
would have been really appropriate. So, the last little bit of, well, maybe not the last little bit of this, but the speak part of it, you could also interpret as anybody who knows sign language isn't technically speaking. So if you communicate through sign language, you ain't talking.
Yeah, and I think we want to be really clear that we're talking about just like literal definitions of words. Like when you look up the word speak, it says, if you burrow down enough, like all of them imply or state outright that we're talking about vocalizations, not kind of written or signed speech. So then if you don't like any of that, or just if you're looking to get into the business of something shady and you're looking for every avenue you could take against Detect Thoughts, the last thing I can think of is that people who believe they're going to be targeted by Detect Thoughts on a regular basis probably have a meditation practice.
Oh, interesting. Quiet your thoughts. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Like they're going to be better at, or they're going to be training their mind to quickly let go of thoughts so that whatever's on the surface is there as little as infrequently as possible. And, hopefully nothing's there at all, or at least nothing about their real intentions.
Yeah, that makes sense. In terms of changing the world, to me, it's the lead-lined hats if it does use Magneto rules.
It's the lead-lined hats for me.
It's the lead-lined hats for me. And just like if you're an adventurer getting armor, any helmet, the armor is like, and I lined it with lead just in case, it's like
that is a fun idea.
And then whatever that lead lining prevents the other things too, that lead somehow prevents Superman being able to see into your chest cavity,
I think detect evil and good if you're carrying poison in your mouth.
Correct. Yes. At this point, we've kind of got a whole security checkpoint set up with multiple passes.
Yeah.
That people have to go through. So, like you said, detect poison, disease, detect evil and good, zone of truth, all of these things you got to go through before you can even be let into the city. Heck, bring in the Book of Exalted Deeds or whatever. Make everybody read that too. So this awful line, worse than the DMV, just people trying to get into any major city being put through this rigmarole every time, and red tape as far as the eye can see.
Well, I don't think people coming in cities are going to be under zone of truth or detect thoughts, but certainly, yeah, major functions where security is taken seriously. There's a lot of spells getting thrown around.
All that red tape, that's kind of a dream of yours, huh, Benjamin? All that bureaucracy, that's kind of your
Benjamin
ideal.
dreams of red tape. That's the documentary about.
I love that documentary. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're just rubber stamping for a half an hour with your son looking longingly over your shoulder, and you're like, You're not ready. You don't know the way of the stamp.
Creating new documents and sub-documents.
Pivot tables. Oh, can we invent spreadsheets? Can we start inventing some spreadsheets and flowcharts for the Dispel world? We got to find a spell that'll do that. If you have any flowcharts or spreadsheets you'd like to add to the conversation, please find us Dispel Magic Pod. You can also email us at dispelmagicpodcast@gmail.com.
Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you again after your next long rest.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Dispel Magic. If this has inspired any ideas for your game, or you have another take on today's topic, please let us know on Twitter @DispelMagicPod. You can find Benjamin @SterlingVermin and Dane @DaneInDanger. Thank you to Slim Mittens for our cover art, produced by Benjamin Huffman, produced and edited by Dane Fox-McGraw.